The Ukraine-Russia war has entered its third year, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said that 31,000 troops have been killed since the war started. Zelenskyy has further said that the Russian forces are preparing for a new offensive against Ukrainian troops in just a few months from now. However, Zelenskyy has also said that Kyiv had a clear plan to counter Russian forces, but that he would not disclose the details that could compromise it. To talk more on this, we are now being joined by Sergei Sulmeny, defense expert and director, European Resilience Initiative Center, and he's joining us live from Kyiv. Thank you so much for taking out time and joining us here on WION, Mr. Sulmeny. Now, Zelenskyy sounded confident that Western support will continue for Kyiv, further lamenting on how West support is extremely crucial for Ukraine. Does he have enough ground to make such statements and for such confidence?
Well, Ukraine's situation is dire, despite a very high level of motivation of the Ukrainian troops and the will of the Ukrainian population to fight for its survival. The support from the West is very limited. Promises which have been made by the West, in particular Germany and the US, have not been fulfilled. Some promises have not been fulfilled at all, some only to like 30–40%. Ukraine doesn't have enough of artillery ammunition. Ukraine doesn't have enough of tanks and other equipment. And that makes the situation problematic. Like, since several months, the US doesn't send to Ukraine any artillery shell. And we see that this time was enough for the Russians to occupy several Ukrainian towns in the east, just because the Ukrainian army could not counter this Russian offensive with ammunition. That is what President Zelenskyy already also pointed out.
Right, absolutely. Do you see US's stance towards Ukraine shifting? You mentioned how the promises made by Germany and the US to Ukraine have not been fulfilled because because just a few days ago, we saw how the Pentagon has opened 50 criminal probes on US aid to Ukraine.
I couldn't hear completely your question, but I believe you're asking like about the alleged cases of mismanagement of funds or
Yes.
even corruption. I don't think that these cases are real corruption cases. We know that during the last decades, Pentagon has opened many of such cases in many countries just because of the problems with the bookkeeping. We know that sometimes new money have been found. During the last 2 years, we have seen the opposite situations when the equipment which was sent to Ukraine was wrongly booked, and so it appeared another fund which could be sent to Ukraine. So I think here the problem is clearly on the Pentagon bookkeeper side. We know that when we talk about very particular arms which have been sent to Ukraine, you can trace any equipment with a serial number. And there have been, early this war, there had been accusation that Ukrainian army has allegedly lost like several anti-tank missiles, Javelin. None of these cases have been confirmed, none of them. Every single case, every single accusation was investigated, and no such thing as lost ammunition or lost equipment has been confirmed. Now, when we talk now about very limited number of heavy equipment, like the US sent a couple of dozen of Abrams tanks, you cannot, you can trace them all every time. And I think it's extremely not probable, that extremely unlikely that Ukrainian army in a situation of dire need of ammunition, of any equipment, will not look very precisely on every piece of ammunition which it receives from the West.
Right, Mr. Sulmeny, you're joining us from Kyiv. Talk to us about the numbers disclosed by the Ukrainian president. He says that 31,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed since the start of the war.
Yeah, that is a very high number. Of course, it is much lower than the number we know about the Russian army and Russian losses, including killed in action and severely wounded, which cannot return to the front line, are about 400,000, according to several sources, including the Ukrainian army. But of course, 31,000 killed. You can add another maybe 100,000, we don't know, of wounded people. It's a huge number for a nation of Ukraine, which only has 40 million people. But this statement by President Zelensky is very significant because Ukraine has never said anything about its losses. It was the state policy not to name the number of losses because they rightfully believe that this information could help the enemy, and there is no need to disclose the numbers because it can motivate the Russians. And the fact that Zelensky has mentioned this number is significant because it means that for Zelensky the situation is very severe, and he believed it is necessary to inform the West about the price of not sending enough ammunition and enough arms to Ukraine. Every single shell that the West doesn't send to Ukraine means additional Ukrainian soldier will die, and that is a very simple equation, very bloody at the same time.
Right. Do you think that the Ukraine-Russia war has reached a stalemate at this point of time?
I do not believe in any stalemate. Of course, Russia can try to offer some sort of a ceasefire, but it is not a stalemate. Russia always tries to reach some sort of agreement which they intend to break next time, but they want to reach it, to regroup, to get like more ammunition, to develop new attack plans, and to attack in 2 months, in 1 year, maybe in 2 years. And I don't see here like any stalemate. Look, the Russians, they have their dire interest to increase their zone of occupation in Ukraine, but the Ukrainians have their dire interest to they occupy the regions. We know what happens to people, to Ukrainian people on the occupied territories, and it's brutal. It's terror pure. It's executions, torture, rape, deportation.
Right.
Ukrainians need to deoccupy them. And military, if Ukraine gets weapons, they can go into offensive. There is no question. So it's not stalemate. It's a artificially made shortage of ammunition for the Ukrainians.
Why do you say artificially made shortage of ammunition for Ukrainians? Can you elaborate on that statement?
Yes, because there are agreements between the US and the EU to deliver these shells. The EU promised to send 1 million artillery shells to Ukraine until this spring. The EU has sent only 300,000. There is this ammunition in the world, and the EU can buy it. The Czech president Pavel said he found like about 300,000 artillery shells, which can be sent to Ukraine immediately. The EU must send money. Now we see that France blocks the purchase of that ammunition because this money goes outside of the EU. That's bullshit. Because if EU could have produced it, this money would have been spent in the EU. The EU cannot. So just buy it, as Czech president offers, and send it to Ukraine. That's artificial. The same we see in the Congress. The Congress took so much time to vote for Ukraine support because Republicans blocked it. Now the bill should go to the House. And Speaker Johnson blocks it artificially. He sends the whole House to vacation for 2 weeks just not to let this bill to end in the discussion in the House. That is, once again, it's artificial shortage. This ammunition is available. We have money to buy it and to send it. We want that Ukraine wins, just like a couple of our politicians who are more concerned about their very narrow political agenda block it. And that's why I say it's artificial.
Right, Mr. Sumleni, thanks very much for taking out time and joining us here on WION.
Thank you so much.